Spellcasting seems to be much better overall. Both sorceries and miracles can be cast with varying strengths. Weaker spells are faster and more responsive, whereas more time casting makes a spell much more powerful. Stronger casts, while slower, aren't necessarily more risky. A player can cancel a cast by rolling. This makes it possible to escape being punished if a risky move isn't going to pay off. Canceling a cast still costs as much as it normally does to roll, so it's not necessarily a get-out-of-jail-free card. Simply casting a spell costs stamina. This will have a strong effect on how players approach spell usage, especially in PvP. Stamina is no longer a near-infinite movement resource to make it easier to kite enemies as a caster. Due to this, it should be a good bit easier to reach a caster. Casting has some other interesting properties. If you two-hand the Dragon Knight Bell or Witch Tree branch, you can hold L2 to block. I'm not entirely sure when it would be best to do this. For the most part, a shieldless spellcaster would be expected to be agile enough to simply roll out of the way. Maybe in the face of a flurry of attacks that were light enough to not guard break the caster, but too fast to safely roll from. Holding L1 while two-handed makes it possible to aim spells like a bow. As spells travel much further than before, this can make it possible to snipe distant enemies. Stronger casts fit here as well. There's plenty of time available for casting. I noticed that there seemed to be some manner of vertical aiming assist while not locked on and not in aiming mode. I had in one case fired a spell that would ordinarily have hit the ground, only to travel directly at the enemy. This might make free aiming spells much more viable. It's also possible to backstab and riposte with a casting implement. It doesn't deal as much damage as, say, a dagger, but it still allows for these actions to be performed without needing to switch to another weapon. Jumping attacks can also be performed with casting implements, although the damage is similarly underwhelming. While sorceries seem to remain primarily geared towards offense, miracles are now a bit better suited for support. Heal and War both affect nearby allies. This isn't to say that there are no useful offensive options for a faith-heavy caster. Miracles like Dark Orb and Lightning Spear deal a fair bit of damage, and overall are much easier to use than their Dark Souls 1 counterparts. The Disc spell, used for casting miracles, also functions as a shield, furthering the idea that miracles are primarily for support and assistance. It could be possible that there are more dual-purpose items like this. Perhaps a catalyst will exist that also serves as a worthwhile melee weapon, furthering the concept that sorcery has a more offensive focus. Maybe these two concepts could be combined. Disc spell in one hand, melee weapon catalyst in the other. It seems that the idea of a character with both sorceries and miracles was much more strongly considered for Dark Souls 2. Some spells even require both faith and intelligence. For example, Dark Orb requires 10 intelligence and 16 faith. Meanwhile, Flame Lash requires 15 intelligence and 14 faith. Based on this, you could guess that dark magic caters toward the hybrid caster who prefers faith, where pyromancy is for those with more intelligence. It seems that spell damage may not peak as high as it did in Dark Souls 1. Spells that would normally kill an enemy player in a few hits instead seem to be much weaker. I think that this allows for easier control over spell balance. Spells could be made much more available without fear that the game would be flooded with massively damaging attacks. For accessibility, I've already mentioned finer control over cast speeds. The fastest are very easy to use and relatively low risk. Furthermore, stat requirements for spells seem to be much lower. The highest stat requirement so far has been 20 faith for Lightning Spear, or 20 intelligence for Soul Greatsword. This pales in comparison to 44 intelligence for Soul Spear, or 50 for White Dragon Breath. Cast counts for spells, despite initially appearing similar to Dark Souls 1, are actually much higher. This is due to cast count replenishment items like Amber Herbs. A well-stocked sorcerer may have effectively infinite casts, and would only have to deal with the burden of consuming more herbs. These high cast counts would make it much easier to be a pure caster. There's no longer as much worry about running out of casts and needing to switch to a melee weapon.